Welcome to the show. So I am Milo Denison, and with me is Kev Bamboo. Hey, Kev.
Hey, how you doing?
We're trying something a little different this week or this month or however you want to say, where we kind of ask a question that's relevant to the film industry or entertainment industry and see how things have changed over the years. It's an open discussion, a debate. It's something to get people thinking.
Yeah, I reckon we're opening up the question to people, putting it out there to the public to say, do you feel that you can separate the art from the artist? And specifically in our industry with acting, musicians, and, across all medium, to be honest, within the industry. So, that's our little debate. But what would you say is your kind of take on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting subject because it's certainly, I would say, in the past few years, become very relevant. And we've certainly seen this in the hashtag cancel culture of if somebody says something offensive or does something offensive, they get canceled in a lot of ways. And we could name a list of actors, musicians, athletes who've seen this happen, and they haven't been necessarily convicted of anything. They've just been accused and they lose their jobs over it. Now, of course, in this industry, they're probably doing all right from residuals from stuff they've done in the past. But still, should somebody lose their job over an accusation, which might or might not be true? And how does that play out? And, do you agree with it or not? In some cases, probably yes. In other cases, probably no.
Yeah, I mean, it brings into question kind of like, is there like a moral limit, where, and how much does that vary between people? Like, do we have, do some people say, well, it's got to be murder or a murder accusation, or has it got to be an abuse accusation, or has it just got to be something really kind of what some might say is relatively simple, like the way that they wear their hair and that they're, being disrespectful to, cultural misrepresentation, or because there's a lot of that. And I don't think, some people don't necessarily mean to, even do that, and if they just thought, oh, I really like this hairstyle and I think it suits me. And they're not really, trying to do anything offensive, but like I say, that's where that moral bar comes in, and different people will likely look at things a little bit differently and think, oh yeah, that for me, that's not so great. And someone else saying, well, that's not so bad. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, we've had so many people kind of like responding lately that have, that they've got their own opinions about, whether they think that they can, because we really want to look at whether we're separating the art from the artist. And that's the important thing. We're kind of saying, can you be an actor? And can people view you as purely just an actor and respect what you do and take that out in separation from maybe you being accused, or even actually, being a convicted criminal as well, because that person may still well have created absolutely brilliant works. And where is that moral line? Is that limit sometimes too much for us to kind of separate the two?
I think, Johnny Depp is obviously a current and recent example. His case with his divorce from Amber Heard, his lawsuit against I think it was the Sun. I don't want to say the paper because I can't actually remember the name of it. But the fact
don't
is,
get getting yourself in trouble now.
Exactly. That's it. Don't cancel me, world. Don't cancel me. Yeah. But basically the situation is they printed a story about him abusing Amber Heard. I'm not going to say whether it's true or not. He sued them for libel and lost the case. So after losing the case, he got fired from the Fantastic Beasts and the Pirates movies. Now, he wasn't convicted of anything. He hasn't been charged with spousal abuse. It's just they said it. He denied it. And the court system said, you don't really have a case against a newspaper. And he lost 2 jobs over that.
Yeah, two pretty big jobs as well, in terms of what he's probably in his most kind of more recent career has built that career on. It's probably made him, if we're talking purely financially, that's probably made him the most, his most money in recent times, because we can all go back to previous movies, but I'm sure he didn't have as much kind of actor power, if that's a kind of word, to kind of like negotiate. So he was definitely one of those that could probably negotiate any fee, that he wanted. So now that's all gone, and we're not going to kind of go on the sympathy side of, because that's not what we're really talking about today. But we're not really going to go on the sympathy of, oh, can they afford? Because we know that likelihood is they've got pretty decent lives. So, yeah. but the issue is whether we can still kind of look at that person's work. And there's also other areas that we might want to discuss as well, where we look at, say, kind of, does it matter if that person is still a living actor? Because does that influence somebody's decision as well? Do they go, well, they're no longer alive, so I can appreciate their works a lot easier now? Or do they say, well, no, because what they did was so terrible that I could never even bring myself to watch any of their movies? So yeah, that brings in a slightly different edge of the question, but it's relevant to the debate, I think, as well, because some people will have their opinions that where their moral limit sits. Yeah, it gives them another answer to kind of judge on, and that's.
Well, and our moral standards change over time. So do we hold people liable now for something that happened in the past? John Wayne is an example, because in the past he made various kind of racist statements. And so there are groups of people now. There's an airport called John Wayne Airport in Los Angeles. And there's a group of people now that want to change the name of the airport to something else because of statements he made in the past. Yes, racism was still wrong back then in his era. But the reality is he was a child of his era. And I would imagine if he was alive now, having been born more recently, he probably, would be more enlightened.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I think, it brings into kind of generational, the generational debate as well. And I think it's important that you brought up John Wayne. And another one that we could maybe kind of touch on as well is which kind of more relates to someone living or now departed, because I think Phil Spector, I think it is the producer that recently has passed away, but was obviously in prison for a murder charge. But of course, people know that, in the industry would say this guy was a very, very talented producer. So yeah, it does bring up a lot of kind of, pulls at the heartstrings, but also gives us something to think about a little further. Yeah. I have got, a couple of, we've been kind of collecting, some information on it recently, and we've got, we put a few questions out to the public because we wanted to see, me and you can have our own opinions, and we can sit here and chat about it all day long if we like, but it's best for us to try and grasp some public opinion on the matter as well. So, yeah, we put a few questions out there, and one of the initial questions, broke them in easily with it here. Was do you feel that you can separate a work of art from an artist, regardless of who that artist may be or have done? In terms of the responses so far was interesting, because there's kind of 5 there in the category, and it was yes, absolutely, I can. There's yes, but I want to elaborate a bit further. And the third was that I've got a moral limit, but I want to be able to. I've got to balance. I want to go further on it. They're open to all sides of the question. And then there was 2 more, which was no, but I want to expand further, and another one was just a flat no. But interestingly, so far is that we've got no one has said no at all in any capacity. Everyone so far has been kind of receptive to maybe being open, maybe being on the fence a little bit, but also as well as several being kind of way up there in their responses of a flat yes, which was quite interesting.
Do you think there's a bias there? Yeah. Because we all think we're open-minded. You talk to very few people that are are you open-minded or closed-minded? They would say, no, I'm closed-minded. Even though you could argue if you're on Twitter at all that people are exceptionally closed-minded on one way or the other. So it is an interesting question. But I imagine a lot of it is biased on how we view ourselves. Like I would say I'm an open-minded person, but maybe somebody else knowing me would be like, no, he's not.
Right. Because myself, I feel that I'm a pretty open-minded person across all society, to be fair. But others might say, well, you can't win either way, to be fair, in that, because some people say, oh, you're just so woke, and I'm like, no, I'm not. But then on the other hand, they'd be like, oh yeah, you're just really narrow-minded. And I'd be like, no, I'm not. But there's probably some kind of middle ground there somewhere. But but it is interesting so far that we've got, all of the responses seem to lean towards a more kind of positive side where they say that they can separate the art and the artist. And also it kind of brings into debate, what is art? I suppose some people will just purely see art as painting and that's it, rather than, all medium. But as an aside, we've got on sorts like 50%. Well, I suppose you could say that these are the fence sitters to a degree. That we have 50% that say that they've got a moral limit, but they're open to kind of all the sides of debate. But then the other 50% is made up of the yes, kind of the yes party, I suppose. The ones that kind of like flatly say yes, absolutely, I can totally separate the art from the artist, and then the others want to kind of chat a little bit more about it. So that was interesting for me because I was expecting a few people to come in and say no, but I have my reasons or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if you want to kind of have a little added input to that as well.
Yeah, I'm going to call BS on the yes, absolutely people. I think we all have a limit to an extent. So whether it be I have a moral limit or can I expand further, I think there's something in there to where somebody could do something so wrong where you potentially would not want to have anything to do with them or what it is. Now, what that wrong is, I don't know. I mean, maybe if some well-known celebrity gets caught, having sex with a chicken and it videos it and throws it on YouTube, maybe that's the line versus, got in an argument with something and said something, racist or demeaning or insulting or something like that. Maybe
like a Twitter argument or something that kind of gets a little bit overblown, or if there's something that they purposely went and like you just explained, that. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there is a massive. It certainly falls on a moral limit. It's just is there a kind of consensus where we say, okay, that's a little bit, that's a bit too, that's making me uncomfortable now in the sense of I don't want to respect that person anymore. But then again, it still brings in that thing of can we actually separate that the works from the actual worker?
Yeah,
the art from the artist, because that's the crux of it. It's like, can you just separate for a second your mind from, they're a really, really awful person, but blimey, that work, especially imagine if the work is so phenomenal. I know it sounds like a ridiculous extreme, but we have to include the extremes in the debate, because there are going to be those kind of cases where somebody is so ridiculously talented, but is also incredibly disturbed as well. And whilst we would all totally agree that person is, not necessarily fit for society, do we then suppress that creativity of that person? Because do we end up with, several works not even being around because those people get stopped from making them? We're not saying that criminals shouldn't be allowed to do whatever they like, but it brings up a debate within the arts as to say, how do you get around that stumbling block of this person's absolutely a lunatic, who shouldn't be near anyone in society, so to speak, but they are capable of producing, absolute, fantastic works.
And it's a good point, because I've said this in the past, especially when it comes to actors, you need to be able to tap into certain emotions and kind of where you're, much easier than if you are, let's say you work in an office where you have a certain standard of behavior within that office and you spend your lifetime, keeping within that box, to where as an actor or a musician, they're all about like letting the emotions out and letting the feelings out. And if we then say, okay, you can only do it here in this situation, but all the rest of the time, I want you to be like everybody else and be in this little box. It's hard to do that. So you do have to allow for a certain allowance that certain types of people are going to behave in certain types of way. It's what makes, everybody unique. And once again, within reason,
Yeah, because I think it's like you say, it's enabling a creative license, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Where otherwise, like you say, we're just putting everybody into a box, and anyone that's creative anyway will totally turn around and be like, "Get me out of that box right now," because they don't want to be, they don't want to be a 9 to 5. They don't want to be told by people, you do this, 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 and this.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's where there is an element of the problem as well, because a lot of creative people cannot kind of comprehend being told what to do. Directors aside, I'm talking, but then they're the most controlling of all. But in terms of creativity, maybe that is part of the problem. Maybe because those people are so unreceptive to being told what to do, but as a kind of average Joe, I suppose you'd kind of say, or someone that just has a regular day job. Maybe there is a problem in a whole with creative people. Maybe we all have to be a little bit odd, to be able to create stuff.
I think so, and I think that's the hard part, is because the majority of the population is the 9 to 5ers, and they're holding creatives to the same standards they hold themselves. Is it right to hold others to the standards you hold yourself? I don't think it is. Well, what's the next question?
Yeah, so the next question kind of like just ramps up things a tiny little bit. We started obviously with a basic kind of yes or no, sit on the fence type of question, but then we rolled it more into kind of like whether, when that person has done something terrible, does it alter our judgment, as to whether the individual's still a great actor, writer, or musician? So we know now that, okay, so we're admitting that this person's done something wrong, or they're being accused of doing something wrong, but are we then letting it alter our judgment this time about whether we're still going to enjoy that person's work or not? And some of the responses, these tended to be a little mixed. And as you were saying, when it comes to the initial question, and you were saying, kind of calling a little bit of BS on the yes, I can be, it kind of scales back a little bit more than when people actually start talking and expanding on it. So someone just popped in there. They're like, well, they said, well, it depends, and time can be the can be the adjudicator on that as well. And then they gave an example, and they said, do we? And they showed us their own moral limit by saying, do we forgive? They said, do we forgive Gary Glitter? I don't know if you know who that guy is, but in the UK, Gary Glitter was a late 70s, early 80s musician, and basically he's a paedophile. So and he left the UK under all this cloud of allegations and went to live in the Philippines. But then it's kind of like been publicly known that this guy constantly was like, in that country, they could like pay off the police. So if he was wealthy, you could kind of buy your way, out of trouble. So no, I don't know whether, I can't necessarily say for certain whether there's been any charges. I do know that he left the UK and went to live in the Philippines for X amount of years to essentially kind of, under these allegations, continue doing what they'd been doing in the UK as well. So yeah, within their response, when they say, it always depends, and time being the adjudicator, would they, would many people in the UK from a certain era, would they forgive, say, a paedophile, for example? So
is he still alive, Gary Glitter?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's
that made me think of Roman Polanski is an example where
for you guys, so
yeah, so he was accused of having sex with a 15-year-old, I think.
I think so. Yeah,
in 40 years ago, and
Yeah.
never stood trial for it. And from all accounts, the sex was consensual, but
Right.
still wrong because she was underage. So he
Yeah.
leaves and continues to live his life in France, and has made numerous films since, numerous great films. I mean, I think of
Yeah.
Chinatown, for example. I think is a fantastic film, and only recently has he really been called out for it in countries other than the US, where people are finally starting to refuse to work with him and give him awards and accolades. So same thing. Do we still hold him liable for something that he did that long ago? And do we now stop watching Chinatown or Rosemary's Baby?
Yeah, and that's it. That's the kind of divisive point, I suppose, isn't it? That we're kind of trying to meet with people and see where they're at. Somebody else, if I can't kind of push it on from Gary Glitter UK and Roman Polanski US, I suppose, if we get looking for relative examples. But if I move on to like another comment, someone said that people should not be judged exclusively on one act or one aspect of their lives. We're all complex human beings. Of course, heinous acts do affect our judgment. So, I thought that was a really, really kind of a balanced answer. But yeah, it certainly opened up the area that, we are all complex. We aren't just, this kind of binary thing, I suppose, if that's, we're not either or. There's lots of parts to us and lots of things that, make us make certain decisions. So great response there.
Yeah, sorry, can I comment on that one? Because I agree with that.
Yeah, no, sure.
I think it's a really brilliant response, because we all change and we evolve and we hopefully become better people, right? So maybe you did or said something in the past that was wrong, but you're guilty about it. You feel bad about it. You've apologized. You've done the right thing, and you're no longer that person. Do you then still be held liable for it? I would, depending on the situation, say maybe we shouldn't hold the person liable, because they've made themselves a better person and they've learned from that bad experience. Really, really insightful response.
Yeah, I think that kind of comes down that, again, that's very much on the individual then, as whether they can, one, rehabilitate themselves with the help of obviously, different services as well. But if they can kind of rehabilitate themselves to be that better person and like I say, come out of it on a slightly more positive edge. And I think most people would be not understanding necessarily, but be receptive to kind of, saying this person has tried to be a better person, to become someone better than they used to be. Doesn't mean that we have to forget what they've done. But at least they're putting in that effort to be a better person going forward. I'll go one more response on there. That is, just before going on to the next question. So, another one says, yes, but maybe not across all mediums, interestingly. They said it's important that the artist's behaviours are known to avoid them being considered as great people, when it is actually their art that is great. So they're really, really getting down to the kind of like separating the two, which I thought was good. And they say this may not be true of writers, though, because depending on whether their work inspires others to poor behaviours. So that was interesting, because obviously the way that a writer may write could have an influence.
I'm thinking Catcher in the Rye inspired what's his name to kill. Somebody was inspired. Was that the guy that killed John Lennon? Basically,
yes. I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that basically saying that writers should be held liable for writing something like that? Then, or are they saying that we shouldn't do that?
I think they're just saying where they're. I mean, it looks like they're saying that we should be able to kind of separate, but can we? But not across all of those mediums. But then they finish with the depending on whether it's true as writers or not. But it seems like they're trying to imply that they're saying that that maybe a writer shouldn't influence somebody to do something bad. But that probably is a little bit more up for we can't really put the liability on the writer for it'd be a bit like someone reporting something in a newspaper, I suppose, as a journalist, and then me reading it and then going, oh yeah, oh look, that bad thing happened today, so now I'm going to go and do exactly the same thing. I suppose it's a little bit different in journalism, I suppose, because you could say that the media have more control over what they report and how that influences. Of course, we know the media influences public opinion, decision, and some of the things that they do, because of course, so many people watch, what I would call some poor television, but it's very, very popular, or the media have made it seem a popular or an attractive choice. So there probably is that kind of influence element, I suppose, where writers can kind of dictate the way public see things.
Oh, absolutely.
But in terms of maybe just like a book, or a writer in general, I suppose would be, I think there's probably more. There's more to discuss on that. So I'd love to hear more on that person's comment, to be honest.
Yeah. It must have some. For me, I would say it has to do with the intent of the writing. Obviously, J.D. Salinger didn't intend for somebody to go crazy and kill somebody else. To whereas, say, Adolf Hitler wrote Mein Kampf with the intent of, becoming a dictator and, killing millions of people. So there's that intent. In the U.S., of course, we have, Fox News is the first one that comes to mind that is very biased in its reporting and has clearly had massive influence on the country. And so are those writers potentially liable for what people have done based on reading their news reports? And, I would say yes, but that's, once again, my point of view might be different from somebody else's.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Certainly, we definitely know, as you just stated, that, the media do have a massive part to play in how they influence the general public, and with those ties being closely linked to politics as well. Often, generally in the UK, I mean, not 100% on the US, because it tends to be individual broadcasters that have got their own leanings already. But in the UK, there doesn't tend to be a massive leaning so much. It always just seems to depend on who the party in power is at the time. So obviously, if it's in our country, obviously Conservative or Labour is the general main two. So they're the ones that tend to switch power. But whoever seems to come into power, our media tends to lean towards that and backs them until they go totally beyond. They're not incredibly biased in the sense that they will hold that one-sided view the whole time, but they will stick with the government in situ until they make it kind of impossible for them to back them anymore. So but that it tends to just sway with whoever is in power. But yeah, they certainly have an influence, and I think most people listening and ourselves would recognize that in terms of that kind of writing. I think it certainly has an influence. So but yeah, you're right, whether J.D. Salinger went out of his way to kind of say, oh yeah, do this like a guidebook to murder, it's not. I personally as well don't think that there was an intent there, but there could be certain story. I mean, there's other ones. There's the who was the author of it's just suddenly gone from me. It was there and it's gone now. Guys, it was really fairly recent. It'll come to me in a second. Right. I'll get there.
We can jump back to it. All right. Any other comments on that question worth mentioning?
Yeah, there may be one more in there.
Okay, one more and then move on to the next question.
One of the final ones that we've got in there is that this person just simply kept it, very, very one level, and they just said the art may be good, but knowing they were bad would make me dislike being a fan. So
say that again for me.
Yeah, they said they state that the art may be good, so they agree that someone may do something great, but but knowing that they were bad would make me dislike them. So I think they're essentially saying that they can't separate themselves from the art from the artist, in that they would say, oh yeah, the art's good, but because they're a bad person, they're not going to like them. And that was their closing comment on that. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a bit more to. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that comment in full, because as we've already discussed, that it's not just purely a matter of disliking somebody, but again, it all falls back to that kind of moral limit, or that moral compass, I suppose, that puts us on our different opinions.
There's got to be an aspect of it too, of like how involved in the art is the person. Like a painter obviously painted their painting, so you could do a 1-to-1, but music producer didn't necessarily write the songs and sing the songs, so
yeah,
it's not really a 1-to-1. They're a little bit removed. Harvey Weinstein produced films, but he didn't direct, write the films and act in the films, kind of a thing. So there's a much larger separation between the two.
Yeah, I think you can kind of, it might be easier to separate when that person hasn't got a visual presence, or an audio presence, as it were, like you and I will have when this goes viral.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but yeah, bringing it back down to the kind of seriousness. Yeah, I think you're right. That probably does affect or impact some people's judgment on where their moral limit is, because of if that person has a visual profile, or as you said, an audio profile, then we're more likely to go, oh yeah, that's that guy off there, and we do association, by the name. If the name's well known, obviously, then of course. But yeah, you bringing up kind of things like artists kind of leads us on to the next question that we kind of posed to them, because I put out an example, and it was just an example, and maybe this artist isn't the best kind of example, because in some of the responses we got, that some were saying that so Van Gogh is the artist that I'm going to give the example of, but they kindly informed me that Van Gogh wasn't that well known whilst he was alive, like many actual painters from certain eras anyway, not talking about modern art, but of his era, and of course he's no longer living. But they said that he wasn't really well known. It was just like you or I, really, and maybe selling the odd painting to our cousin or our uncle or whatever. So basically, if we can't separate the art from the artist, so if we're in that camp where we're like, I really can't, which kind of leads on from the last person's response, saying that they'd appreciate that they'd done a good thing, but they couldn't bring themselves to like a person or separate the art from the artist. So I led that with, if we can't do that, now how does that impact the way in which we look at or judge, future artists or actors and things, because if we've got that kind of that predetermined idea already, what happens when someone new comes to the scene and then they're doing kind of okay, and then the next, or even if they're not initially that well known, but then they do become well known, does it change over the time? So like the reason why I gave the example of Van Gogh, which was where I said, Van Gogh may be perceived as a very unstable human being, because it's very historically noted. He cut off his own ear. He tended to enjoy taking LSD, and and he probably did numerous other things. Basically, he wasn't necessarily a terrible person in equal senses to somebody like Phil Spector. I'll bring it back to that, because that's if we want to compare. But in his time, had he been alive today, you could imagine in the news it would probably be pretty, modern artist, cuts off own ear in LSD rage. You could imagine the red top headline being there, and or people within art circles might say, oh, I'm certainly not going to bother kind of buying any of this stuff. That's totally totally against anything like, can't have people like that around. But then there'd be other people that'd be saying, oh no, we need someone like this because they make the industry interesting, or it brings us to the fore. So I gave that opinion out as a small example, and the fact that his works are viewed today, obviously, and admired by thousands of people amongst other artists that are around. But yeah, would if he was around today, would we kind of speak differently of him?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because as an artist, I would expect of that type of art, and I would expect the person to be a little out there. Like it's funny, we have this saying or I have the saying, or I'm sure other people have the saying too, but basically, if you have no money, you're crazy. If you're rich and famous, you're eccentric, So
Yeah.
It could be the same person with or without money, or the same person as an artist versus not being an artist. And so if you're a famous artist, as he was, or if he were alive now, people, I would imagine, would be like, oh, he's so eccentric. And potentially that would increase the value of his art. They'd be like, oh my God, he did this and this and this. I need some of his work. So in that context, yeah, I would say if, and I do not encourage artists to chop off their ears or do any of the other crazy stuff he did. He was clearly unstable, but, it would, I think, help the sale of his art. However, I don't think it would happen nowadays, because nowadays they would have probably put him on medication at a younger age, and he potentially wouldn't have even gotten to that point.
Yeah, I was going to kind of a probably relevant modern one would move on to someone like Andy Warhol. But it's interesting that you said about today that probably wouldn't have happened, because he'd basically be comatose essentially. And we did have one response that related to that, saying that that often they think that we judge historical people by the present conditions and norms of our culture, and this is kind of unfair because people's lives in times with different social moves and conditions. So if they basically said if Van Gogh were alive today, he might be drugged up on SSRIs and leveled out, not to be producing art at all. So again, that's another form of suppression, I suppose we could say, that we talked about earlier, saying, do we stop that person from being an artist as well? So there's two little, does societal acceptance come into it, as well as also just, a doctor saying, I'm going to stop you from being creative because, you are so erratic, So yeah, it's nice that you touched on that, because obviously, we've got certain response there relating to a similar kind of answer. And yeah, we've had one more that kind of gives their own example as well. And they say the further back in time the artist lived seems to mean that time separates the art from the artist. The artist becomes more as merely a name rather than a person, which I totally agree with thoughts and feelings. But in an age where people are held more accountable for their actions, such things are changing. So as we go on, that's less acceptable. I think that's probably because we as a public are much closer to actors and artists now, thanks to social media and things, as we talked about earlier. But they go on to give an example of Rolf Harris. Have you heard of Rolf Harris? Okay, so he's a British kind of celebrity. Well, actually, he's Australian, so that's a mistake. He's Australian, but he was a British citizen essentially. And yeah, he was an artist, but he was like a celebrity artist, and he'd be on kids' TV in a kind of, well, for years and years, through kind of like my parents' late childhood and my childhood as well. So like this guy was prevalent and always on TV, went on to do other things right up until probably I think it was around about the mid 2000s. And so Rolf Harris, he'd come on, he'd do little, sketches. I think you have similar with who's the Bob guy?
Oh, Bob Ross?
Yeah, Bob Ross. So
okay.
basically would teach people how to paint essentially on TV. So similar kind of celebrity in that sense. Obviously, I'm assuming totally different character. But this guy was a national hero in the sense of much more than the previous guy that we talked about, Gary Glitter. This guy was everywhere. He was, if he was on every chat show for time, and he was like seen as this lovable old guy that helped people paint, very much like, your Bob Ross kind of person. Just, you could not imagine, and you can imagine the shock when people realized that he'd done something really terrible. And like, this guy could never, ever do anything bad, in the public eye, even when it was confirmed that he was, he'd been convicted, there are still people saying, no, I don't believe it. And, you get your kind of little conspiracy edges that come from that. But yeah, this guy, Rolf Harris, he was artist, musician and TV personality. And then the rest of their comment says, but now, or to most people now he's just remembered as another one, unfortunately, as a child molester. And he actually was, convicted of it, and as I assume is still in jail. It was only several years ago. But yeah, so he's obviously blacklisted now. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think they're right in saying that, further back in time, we could just associate the name with the piece of art rather than the actual person or the celebrity. So I think it probably brings into question more about us individually as well, so because now we look at anyone that does anything particularly or remotely within the public eye, suddenly they're a celebrity. Well, we see nowadays it's influencers, isn't it? That are that have YouTube channels or, huge Instagram accounts, and they're not actually. So that kind of brings it back a little bit with the what's his face, Van Gogh.
Yeah,
Van Gogh comment as well about, if someone's not, they're not that well known. Like there'll be loads of influencers and YouTube stars, so to speak, that I may know one or two of them, but there seems to be there's probably hundreds that have got millions and millions of people following them for very. I'm not going to say very little, because obviously what is art? That's another question. But so, some people will, like what they're doing. Of course, lots are, but they're very much instantly, they're in the public eye from the off. As soon as, a company may have decided that they're going to make this person into like a star, and they're going to use that person as a new celebrity. But in the main, that person decides that they're going to give up their freedom, as it were, to be this instant kind of recognized person that's online constantly, is always seen. And to a degree, they're doing that of their free will. But publicly, I'd say that they're not that well known, in the sense of, yes, lots of people know who they are that are following them. But quite equally, there'd be millions of people that would say, I've no idea who this is. They then go and check out, their YouTube or whatever, and go, I really don't see what all the fuss is about, because it's just not that great. And that's that. But then they go and do something, and such as the kind of throwaway culture, as I was saying, is social media having that effect on how we can't just go now, oh, such and such great poet, or such and such, they were a great artist, or we can say George, not saying that George Seurat as a painter was controversial, but when we say George Seurat, all I think of is pointillism, and that's and a scene in the park where it's all the dot work, and that's the painting that I recognise him for. But I don't think anything about the person, at all. I don't go, oh yeah, him. I've got an opinion on who he was. I just purely know that one very famous painting, as well as probably a lot of others that he did. But in the main, and most people that would know of that artist would just go, oh yeah, that guy did that painting. So they're known more for that. But today, I don't think people can kind of get away with just that, because we're so more kind of involved in their lives. The visibility is so much higher. So does that affect our opinion and the way that we see them? And if something minor, also gets brought up, like you say, a Twitter spat, or an Instagram post or whatever, all of a sudden we go cancel culture, as you opened with at the beginning. So yes.
Yeah, it's a hard one, because you are, in a lot of ways, what you do, right? I mean, anytime you have a conversation with somebody, at some point in the conversation is, oh, what do you do for a living? What do you do? Are you this or that? And your example of the artist, I can't remember his name. What did you say his name was? The pedophile one?
Oh, Rolf Harris. Yeah.
Rolf Harris.
Kind of, at the time, British national hero. Yeah. All that.
But but the thing is, like, if he's out there as a certain type of thing, doing kids shows and painting, and then, is arrested and convicted for molesting children, I mean, you can't separate that. Like, it's much more difficult to do. I know Disney has in their contracts with a lot of their stars a morality clause, because they're basically saying, you're working for Disney, and we're a company, we're all about families, we're about, PG, we're about this and this. So you can't be going out getting drunk on the weekends and, getting into bar fights and this kind of stuff, because you're representing us in a lot of ways. And this isn't that unusual from any other business, right? We've got...
No, sure, yeah.
If you work for a tech company, there's statements in the contract you sign with them that if you're out in some kind of a public event representing that company and you do it in a negative way, well, then you're held liable for that. And so as an actor working on a Marvel film, you're linked to that. And yeah, it's a decision you have to make. Like, are you willing to be linked to your art? And if so, then you need to be aware of what you're saying and doing publicly, like it or not.
Yeah, that is probably not the most difficult thing, because obviously, like you just said, when you kind of enter that agreement and that contract that you're, especially within the, film industry, because most people are freelance in the sense of, actors are self-employed. So they go into that gig, they know full well they've got to conduct themselves in a certain way. And especially whilst they're under that production company or under that studio, I think that goes without saying. But I think then it brings back another thing about social media is so inclusive. So and we do have there are actors that just don't use social media at all, and probably that's probably the best way. I think you can only really do that if you've got a certain standing already. If you've got a certain reputation within the industry. I don't think somebody new can come into the industry and not have any social media accounts. I don't think that's possible. So
it's interesting because I'm an actor and I'll audition for stuff, and sometimes they will ask you for your social media. It's usually smaller productions because they want to potentially cast people with large followings to help promote the film. So there is an aspect of where they will say, hey, I want to, are you on social media? Can you send it to me? But even how you present yourself, like agents will basically say, do you have social media? And then they'll look at your social media, and if it's you getting drunk and pissing on a street corner or at some they're not going to want to represent you.
Absolutely. And definitely, I would be very surprised, not that there are any pictures of me pissing on a street corner, but I'd be very surprised if an agent turned around and said, Oh yeah, we're gonna book you because there's one real niche role that we've got for you.
Yeah.
Exactly. And again, that transcends across any kind of job in any industry your own personal conduct, of course, is always, how you behave is always down to yourself, and the younger amongst us will kind of either find out a slightly harder way, or or will be wise to that straight away. Yeah. Probably more wise to it than you or I in terms of social media wise, because we've grown up coming out of an analog age and into a digital age. So we weren't born into it, but we were young enough to kind of adapt. I think more so than a previous generation of ours who found it a little bit more difficult to adapt. Yeah. We've probably adapted fairly well. We're like a lucky generation in a way. We've seen the old fashioned, and we kind of hold a little bit of that in us, but we've also kind of been able to be receptive to the new stuff. But yeah, certainly. Yeah, the way that you behave, I think, is obviously always going to be important. I just was basing it more on the fact that famous people are so much more under the spotlight than they would have been, like say, not even 40 years ago. Let's say 20 years ago.
Yeah,
because now everybody has one of those. And that means even things like reporting things. We're not just going down the shop to get our local paper and go, oh man, this happened like 2-3 days ago. It's like fire here, paedophile here, murder here. Everything that's happening is there in our, 7-inch screen. Mm-hmm. And so of course, there's the likelihood then that more and more people are going to get flagged up for maybe even the most minor of things, and those things are going to get inflated as well. Whereas maybe so there's again, I think there's still a line, of course. You can't have people just blasé Sweeney Todding people all the time or whatever. We can't just have that. But also that kind of the kind of, I suppose it's like almost like a little bit of an infiltration into the kind of privacy element of people. But then they are putting themselves out there at the same time. So there's a balancing act for sure. But I do think that there are elements that kind of get, overinflated that wouldn't necessarily have ever got inflated at all. Just for something very, not saying that something's necessarily wrong, but something very, very minor. Might be the way that somebody's. You look at all the mags, even for the last 30 years, even pre kind of smartphone, all the magazines, that want to show off the perfect person, and then they're kind of going, oh, look at Demi Moore's got 2 buttons undone. She's not looking so great today. It's like, really? Who cares? Yeah. But a lot of people will buy that because they're influenced by the look of that person, or how that again, that goes back down to the media influence. But I suppose we can just say that is, there's so much more of it now that it's so in our faces that even if we don't subscribe to it to a degree, we're still seeing it, Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's no problem. So let's just talk a little bit further about the kind of, not necessarily the media influence, but more just the fact that society is so much in our face, even if we're not that well known at all. We could have 300 followers on Twitter, and still, we might kind of get this kind of cancel culture happen to us for something very, very little. We might tweet something once and it goes viral for the absolute wrong reasons, just because one person decided that they didn't like it.
Yeah.
And it gets retweeted. And then you're in a situation then. Yeah. So that's probably worth expanding on for a second.
Yeah. And that happens all the time too. James Gunn just came to mind, the director of Guardians of the Galaxy. So he did a tweet years ago, long before he was employed by Disney and Marvel. And it was just kind of it was off-collar joke, right? It wasn't necessarily something he believed or anything. He just was making an off-collar joke that, you could argue wasn't funny. And then what happens when that comes back to light? He then got fired from Disney, who, nicely, changed their mind and realized, okay, we shouldn't be holding him liable for that. He apologized for it and stuff. But but exactly. I think about this quite often of stuff that I say on, because I do podcasts, or write, and it's like, is what I'm saying, I don't necessarily think it's offensive, but does somebody else out there think this is offensive? And then when they take it offensively, then what's going to happen? And so, if 5 years from now, maybe I'm on the cusp of getting cast in a major motion picture, and somebody's like doing a search on me and be like, "Oh, he did this. Uh-oh." And
he said this in
exactly
2020,
as an
2021 even
offhand comment, not even really thinking about it. And nope, all right, next person. So it's dangerous, especially because that line changes so easily of like, the left and the right and the right and the wrong, and where that moral center is. And, right now, no problem. Next week, problem. And just because, and you can't say anything nowadays without offending somebody. It does not matter,
Yeah, and I think, like you say, you're totally correct in that terms of like that shifting, blurred line kind of thing, because it's not just like we know that it's flexible. We know that we know that morality is flexible, but from 1 week it could be there's a bit of a grey area there, but then the next week it's kind of shifted this way a little bit, and that's really, really interesting. And I think also because going on to Guardians of the Galaxy guy, I think that's now, and I suppose people have done it for quite a while. That's why people tend to put on their profiles and things so that they cover themselves for their work, especially if they've got a bit of an association with an employer. That they will put my views are my own opinion and not that of my employer. And that's kind of like, it's mad to think that we have to put that in order to ensure that we say that we keep our job role in case we say something out of term, or it can at least disassociate us from that company. So we're doing the kind of like the right thing, that even if somebody does say something bad or does something bad, then instantly with that one statement, they're separating themselves from the company. So the company doesn't get a bad name. That one is really, really, I'm glad you highlighted that actually, Milo, because I think there's a lot you could discuss that on its own quite a lot further as well. Coming back onto one of the questions, the kind of last one that I posed to him, which then kind of focused a little bit on Woody Allen as an example, was more about that when we can separate those two things, is that how do we process that separation as well? Because we might well, like the example being Woody Allen, certainly, everyone knows that he's a fantastic director. I don't think anyone could turn around and say he's rubbish at what he does, because I think he's made something like, I'm sure he's made nearly 50 films, and I'm sure he's had something like at least, I'm going to say a third, I've got to say around about 16, 17 of them he's got Academy Awards for. And on top of that, there have been actors and actresses that have also got Academy Awards off the back of his movies. But then it comes on to the process of the separation, because his most recent film that goes out, I think, in the summer, is A Rainy Day in New York. I think it's Timothy Chalamet is in that, who's obviously pretty big at the minute, and a very young lad, to be honest. But he has disowned himself. He's disowned his role from that film. So that's in the modern day. This person's creating great movies, obviously. But even the actors that are working under him, as it were, are disassociating themselves from his movies. So how do we how do we process that separation in that example or similar, I suppose?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Woody Allen too is you're absolutely right. He's done some great films over his life, and so many actors that have worked with him in the past are basically saying, "Oh, I wish I hadn't done that," or I don't want to associate with him. And I would expect that A Rainy Day in New York will be his last film. I don't see him ever getting another film made, because he even had a hard time getting this one made and getting it distributed after he made it, and still.
Yeah.
And I would imagine.
Yeah, because I think it got dropped initially, didn't it? It was booked by a distributor, and then they dropped it, I think. So
yeah. So he's finally getting it out there, and I doubt anyone will see it. So nobody's gonna fund any of his films because nobody's gonna go see his films. So this is probably his last film, and technically, he's hasn't been charged with a crime. And he hasn't been convicted of a crime. You could say we just, as a people, say, that makes me feel icky inside. So let's disown him in every way possible because of that one thing. And was it right? I don't know. I'm not the moral police, but
yeah, I think it comes across as very, very I think a lot of people would agree that it comes across as very creepy, or as you say, but oh man, did you really, did you have to do that?
But it's technically not illegal.
But yeah, I mean, from as far as I know, from the things that I've read, and not not just hearsay things, just the things that I've read were, that I think it was his stepdaughter, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, stepdaughter. Hey folks, just a quick interruption here. What happened was we were recording this over Zoom, and it got a bit choppy due to the network connection, and some stuff got cut out. And I want to make it very clear as to the topic that we're primarily speaking on, and that's Woody Allen's relationship to his current wife, Soon-Yi, who was his stepdaughter at one point in time, but then when she became an adult, they got married, and they're still married. We are not really discussing his relationship with his ex-wife, Mia Farrow, and any allegations there. We're also not discussing any of his relationship with his daughter, Dylan Farrow, and the allegations there. And we're not in any way saying we agree or disagree with one side of the argument, or who's right or who's wrong. We weren't, obviously we don't know anything about this beyond what we've read in the news. All we're saying in regards to this discussion as a whole is, are these allegations, true or not, enough to justify no longer seeing his movies or going to work with him? And once again, we're not taking a side. We are just having the discussion about it. But I want to make it very clear that if, let's say, more investigation is done and something else comes out about Woody Allen, that's not the topic of this discussion. It's primarily just focused on his relationship with his now wife. Okay, so got that out of the way. Since you probably might not have gotten that due to some of the choppiness and cut out of it, we just want to make sure nothing we say gets interpreted as a defense of any inappropriate behavior anyone has taken. All right, back to it.
Just the things that I've read were, that I think it was his stepdaughter, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, stepdaughter, adopted daughter, I think.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So it was Mia Farrow he was married to.
Yep.
I think.
Yep.
And then their adoptive daughter, he then obviously got into a relationship with. I think that's right. And then I think possibly what the crux with that is the fact that I think, because obviously Mia Farrow, he was married to, and then their child, or one of their childs, so it was Rob, wasn't it? I think. Now, Rob, I think, was very much involved in bringing about the Harvey Weinstein. I think he was very much. He wrote a piece because he's a journalist. I think Rob Horan is.
Okay.
And he wrote a piece that was very, very damning of Harvey Weinstein, and that brought about the whole kind of Me Too movement, I think, and that's where that grew. And I think obviously because of that association, his child is obviously part of that, and then Woody Allen's got this kind of very uncomfortable background, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe with that association, maybe people thought, if you've got that, you know, that something so close to home there happening, would it, you know, maybe it's just very, very, Woody Allen doesn't strike me as the kind of person who's naive. You know, he's an incredibly intelligent person. So you would maybe question, would it be right for him to do that? And then looking at, not necessarily what he's done is wrong, but just in context of the whole environment that's surrounding his family and that set of scenarios. Should he maybe have thought differently about that and go, I'm going to wait till things kind of maybe cool off a bit, and then maybe I'll announce my, my partnership or whatever with my adopted stepdaughter or whatever.
Well, they're married now, and they've been married for
yeah,
quite a few years.
Yeah,
so clearly they're happy.
Yeah, several. Yeah, that's it, and that's no one can actually say anything in terms of, because surely, you know, she would not still be married to him if there was anything, you know, untowards in that sense. Hopefully, from the outset.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, we would like, we'd like to
hope
that they wouldn't, and there's not anything else, you know, further going on. It's probably not fair for us to speculate on that much further like that. But the other element I was going to bring into it was the fact that his actual current film that will come out soon is the storyline about that is very Woody Allen in the sense of, and so that has kind of like critical aspects straight away, because some might say, why would you write a movie like that? And for anyone that doesn't know, the movie plot is basically, you know, it's about a director that kind of falls for this girl, and he kind of pursues her through New York, and there's other suitors, and there's nothing wrong in isolation with that movie or that plot. We've seen it probably hundreds of times across, you know, stories similarly told, but the fact that the way that it's written is very much, you know, of how people may perceive Woody Allen.
Mm-hmm.
They look at that and they would go, you know, they're going to be critics and they're going to be journalists, and they're going to look at that and they're going to think, why, with all this speculation around you, why would you then write about a man who kind of aggressively pursues a female? You know, it's not going to help matters. I mean, that seems to me a little bit of a naivety there, but I don't feel that Woody Allen is that naive to do that. Yet here he is writing a film that almost reflects his very similar character, or the way that he behaves.
Is he potentially trying to tell his side of the story in some way?
I don't know. I really don't know. I suppose that would lie with the viewer, I suppose, when they come to watch it. Because of course I've not seen a screen of it, but it doesn't come out till I think June or something like that. But it's totally open. Maybe he is trying to tell it from an aspect of his own point of view, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I suppose there will be lots of people that will, within critical circles, that will talk about it. You know, film critics will talk about it. I'm sure that when it comes out, for one way or the other, you know, I'm sure they'll say it's a brilliant film. It's shot beautifully. You know, most of his films are shot really, really well. I can't remember the Italian guy that often does the cinematography for Woody Allen, but often they're really, you know, they're really beautifully shot films usually, you know. Yeah. They highlight, you know, the backdrops are beautiful, you know, everything about each individual shot's great. But yeah, the bottom line on that would be more to do with, I suppose, the film critic response when they view it. But of course, we're kind of 3-4 months or whatever away from anything about that, so it possibly could be revisited. But on that, so we did have a few responses relating to the Woody Allen example, and whether, you know, people can, you know, how they process that separation of art and artist. And so one guy said, So again, we're basing these aren't necessarily our opinions. These are just opinion that's coming from others. But this person says that they would perhaps not approve of Alan's actions, but they would not approve either of his films, which they then say tells a valid part of his or our human story. Okay, right. So they're basically saying that they wouldn't approve Alan's actions, but then they're questioning, would I not approve either of his films? So they're saying that they might not. Again, they're not liking the person, but they're separating that art, and they're actually saying that could they approve of his films? So then that tells further in their answer tells a valid part of our own human existence or stories, how we have that approach to Woody Allen films or Woody Allen the man. And they go on to say, if there's an actual crime, obviously prosecute the artist, not the art if it's good. And then they finish with, a plant with poisonous roots or leaves might still produce a beautiful flower. So again, it's that kind of trying not to kind of suppress creativity, I suppose, where our, again, falls on that moral line.
Yeah.
I thought that was when I read it in the right way, because it's a little bit broken in the way that it was constructed, but when you actually read into the detail of their comment, actually it's a really, really good comment, because especially the parting line, that's a kind of a bit of a money shot line, but a plant with poisonous roots or leaves might still produce a beautiful flower. So, they are essentially saying, a bad person can still create something amazing. So that was one on there. I don't know if you want to pick up on that response at all.
Yeah, I think it's a valid response. That just kind of falls into that category of how you decide what to separate. And Woody Allen's an interesting example, because a lot of people like his films and then a lot of people don't like his films. So it's easy to say, okay, I disapprove of his behavior and I'm not going to go see his films because I already don't like his films, right? Like, Marilyn Manson, for example, I've never really been a fan of his music. So it's easy for me to say I don't approve of him because of the way he treated, I can't remember her name at the moment. Evan Rachel Wood is who I'm thinking of. So anyway, so it's easy for me to be like, well, I'm never going to buy any of his CDs or listen to any of his music because I don't like it already. So it's easy if you're already not a fan of Woody Allen. If you are a fan of Woody Allen, then you have a harder decision to make. And it's, well, am I going to go see one of his films if I don't approve of his behavior?
Yeah, because that's definitely an easier way to separate the art and the artist, because you totally separate. You're not even separating them. You're just going,
yeah, I
don't like that, so it doesn't really affect me. So it's not going to be troublesome for me to come to an opinion on that. But that's I like that you brought up that regarding Woody Allen and Marilyn Manson, because they're both great examples. Yeah, another one that came in that says, and this again is because I did ask people if they wanted to give their own examples as you did, they could do, but a lot did follow on from the Woody Allen one, because I think it was just such a strong example for them to lead off from. And yeah, someone else commented. This one's a longer comment, but I thought it was quite good. So in a way, it's a case of whether the audience looks at it in a naive way of the work as it is, without connecting the creator to it, or in a sense accepting that the terrible things were done from a mindset that was a product of its time, or the audience judges the artist and the art as one and denies the work's merit under moral standings, unless, like a lot of the time in society we live in, the artist owns up to their sins and as such show that they regret their actions. We kind of touched on it earlier on. Nowadays, the reformed can come back and be morally approved of, or show that they're facing their own annihilation of being remembered. So, yeah, that touched on us a little bit further back up when you mentioned about that. But that was a really good detailed answer that I think definitely held a lot of credence. A long answer, but a good answer. And then, do you want to hear another?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay, yeah, we'll go. We've got time for one more, I reckon. And another one, another longish one. But they say, so again, by acknowledging that all humans are capable of good and bad, and artists are just one example of that. If people do wish to forgo art because of their issues with its creator, then that's a personal choice. But if we're to limit the appreciation of art to that produced by only good people, then there may not be a lot left to appreciate. So then they go on to say, this may be actually easier after someone has died. For example, they say they love the music of the Stone Roses. So, and it stirred a part of them when they first heard it, and it still does over 30 years later. But Ian Brown, however, they say, is a grade A pillock. This is purely their opinion. But, they really love the Stone Roses music, but they think Ian Brown is, not that great a guy. They just think, yeah, a bit of an idiot. Yeah. So, but then they also say that they see a lot of adulation for musicians in particular, where people idolize a musician because they love what they produce. Like you said earlier about the kind of, if you don't like the music, then you can kind of just shut all of it off and be like, nah, I don't like that person. Yeah, they're bad. That they do something wrong. I'm not going to care for them so much. So that led on there. And then he said, so once Woody Allen has passed away, it'll be much easier to enjoy some of his films knowing that he was actually flawed. So instead of us maybe trying to create this kind of perfect image of just good people only allowed to create things, is it better for us to kind of view them, as we've posed the question at the beginning, separate the art from the artist, and then bring us around to that we can appreciate that those people may have flaws. We can see that they've got inconsistencies, as we probably all do to a degree. Some are going to be way more severe than others, but should that suppress creativity? Should we not separate the art from that artist? And I think that really that final answer there, that person, I think they really define with the depth of the question. I think they cover, they answered that really, really well there. I'd love to probably get that person on to discuss,
Yeah, and they're absolutely right. I mean, we all are good and bad, and flawed, and in our own ways. So, yeah, if we only enjoyed art from truly good human beings, there would be no art.
Yeah, I think it'd be very, very limited.
Yeah.
As they say, that there would not be a lot left for us to look at. I mean, we could probably, let's pick out a modern artist today. Damien Hirst, for example, very, very controversial for some of the ethics used in the way some of his installations come about, but some absolute fantastic works, in my own opinion. A lot of other people will say anyone can chop up a cow into 3 bits and chuck it in some formaldehyde and and put it on some plinths and sell it for 80 million or whatever. I don't know about the figures, but the realm in which we're talking. I don't necessarily agree in the values of the works going forward, but I certainly appreciate the artist, and I think I would probably appreciate Damien Hirst's work even if they did something really bad. Because I'm looking at the art, and I totally am separating that. And this is a living working artist of today, and I do think I could, and I know I'll probably get a lot of stick for that from some people. They'll say, but how could you possibly support or say that work's great? But I couldn't be adult enough and look at it in isolation and say, no, I'm appreciating the artwork and saying, this is a great sculptor, but I'm not actually saying that I really, enjoy the person or who they are or their personal character.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably someone mentioned it earlier on in the comments. It really kind of fires back to us individually as to when we're assessing it. If we can separate ourselves from that artist and just purely look at the art in an individual sense, then surely it's totally fine for us to enjoy that piece without us coming under our own set of scrutiny just for having that opinion, and also without being kind of victimized for people thinking that we support the individual. I think it may be different if we were buying their work. That may be different because we're supporting more so. If we were actually promoting the work all the time, more so. But are we doing that? If we share it on social media, and so, and then it's a known terrible person, and we suddenly share something. It's like I really like that. There's a lot of speculation. Let's say with Michael Jackson, although he's no longer alive, but thousands of people share his music every day, millions, no doubt. But there's a lot of again, allegations that never have and never probably will come to light. But a lot of allegations and a lot of dodgy stuff surrounding that individual opens up a bigger question again. But just on the basis, a lot of people are sharing that material. But so then are they guilty of them furthering that person, even though they're no longer alive? But we all know that person was when we're talking about Michael Jackson, they were absolutely fantastic. Just the whole thing was production. It wasn't just music, wasn't just a video. It was a whole damn production that I don't think I know anyone that would have ever listened to any Michael Jackson music and not at least nodded their head or tapped their foot or felt like kind of dancing or singing along to that video, because there's just something about it. It's just really, really great production.
One thing, it's interesting because as with film and music, though, we could potentially enjoy the art while also not supporting the art, thanks to the ability to illegally download content.
Well, so, I suppose, that is a good point.
You could watch a Woody Allen film while also not giving any money to a Woody Allen film.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, and again, none of us here condone the illegal streaming of movies or live music. None of us have ever done anything like that at all. And we definitely don't encourage any of our guests to do so. But that would be quite a valid option.
A not valid option, but an option, yes.
But an option.
An option we would not recommend.
Valid in the sense that in terms of supporting or not supporting the artist that comes under this speculation and has this stigma attached to them. So I think there's some real good answers that have come back. A few that I disagree with, a few there that I definitely totally agree with. But for me, one of my favorite comments from the whole thing, and I think it covered the whole question really about the kind of like the ethics and the stigma and everything associated and all the opinions that kind of fall behind this whole question, which will bring up so many different opinions from all walks of life. And, everyone's got an opinion, and thanks to social media these days, even more people do. But the comment it was literally a plant with poisonous roots or leaves might still produce a beautiful flower. And I don't think anyone at all really could argue with that. That is a completely all-rounding, kind of all-covering statement that I think when we're wanting to view something ourselves, I think that kind of comment would be the thing to kind of remind us of, that we're not all perfect and that we should not necessarily be suppressing creativity as we know it, just because somebody may have done something bad, but they're still capable of producing, fine works of art. I think that's literally like kind of my closing statement, really, using that comment that I think was, covered all areas. I think. Was there anything for you that stood out at all that was there that was mentioned?
I think it was interesting. I'm really impressed with that so many people took the time to put such thought into their answers. And it is nice to see that people are thinking about it and asking themselves the question of like, where do I draw the line? I mean, I know I certainly thought about it, like, what's my line in regards to how I separate that art, and it varies it depends on the issue, what the person did, whether they were actually accused or convicted or any of the all of the above. And it's really good to hear that people aren't just saying yes, no, right, wrong, that they're kind of in the middle somewhere and giving it some thought. So I'm really impressed with those responses and how well thought out they are.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely appreciate the responses today. I think like you say, although at the initial outset, you called it almost straight away at the beginning, and there's no disrespect to anyone that actually commented, but you called it out from the first answer. When you give them an easy option, it's very easy for them to say, oh yeah, I'm not this, or I am this, or whatever. But when it came into like the more detailed responses and that they could expand on it further, yeah, things fall a little bit kind of more towards the middle ground, and people do clearly show that they are quite kind of torn within their own opinions. I myself would say I'm probably struggle on some aspects of answering some of those questions, because it's not just a cut and dried answer. I don't think you can just purely say, yep, it's this. And you're totally right. Where that kind of moral line sits will probably fall in different places for everyone. But I do wonder if there is a consensus somewhere that kind of meets some form of middle, whether that sits a little bit higher in the yes area or a little bit on the lower on the no area. So it's just almost kind of posing a bit of a political question, almost in a way. It's like, where do you sit? Are you kind of just left of center or right of center, so to speak? Are you up of yes or down of no? Or it's definitely it's given me food for thought with all the great responses so far, and I'm sure the takeaway from it is that everyone's obviously clearly got an opinion, but ultimately it falls down to where your actual moral line sits, and that will be different for all people.
Yep. All right. Well, let's wrap it up there then. So thanks for listening. I am Milo Denison, and
well, I'm Kev Bamboo, and it's been great having you here and having our comments and maybe guests.